right, looks like I'm live. So, like I said in the description, looking at doing a live reading of In Darkness Cast, which is my first fantasy novel, and just doing a practice run, seeing how I'm going to do the reading. When I redo the audiobook, just so it matches the second one, which is the one that I'm also narrating. Nick did a great job. I'm not dissing Nick at all. I just need the narrators to match, and his schedule is pretty slammed. So we'll go ahead and get started on this. I don't know how far I'm going to get. Also, my children are awake. They're doing school. You might hear them screaming, crying, whatever. I'm sorry. It's part of being in my house. So y'all can figure out what that's like. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Shades of Black, Book 1, In Darkness Cast. Shades of Black in Darkness Cast is dedicated to the warfighters of the 26XX field in the United States Marine Corps. This is for the 26-7Xs, which are 41s now, 21s, 31s, and 51s who swore the oath to serve, in either SL3 gear at 1700 on a Friday, or spent years in a windowless box explaining to the LT how many slash marks are appropriate on a classification marking. God bless us, everyone. Riot kill. I'm not actually sure if I should read the prologue in an old man voice or if I'm just going to do it in a normal voice. I'll try it in the old man voice, and you guys can tell me in the comments if you prefer the old man or if you prefer the just the regular narration. Prologue. Warning. There is no sound more heartbreaking than an old man walking through a field of his son's skulls. Rain makes them slick. My shoes, more suited to libraries and repositories of arcana, struggle to find traction on the gleaming bone. I lean on my staff heavily as I pick my way through the field of jagged skeletons, my breathing ragged, my tears masked by the rain. So many. Each skull, grinning from the ground, belonged to a man of Avalon. Some from Tabela, some from Corland, others from the far-off mountains of Saradon. Their uniforms paint the ground like an artist's palette, a record of the impossible alliance of the nations of Avalon. Men of every race, color, and creed, all coming together to face the Lord of the everlasting dark. It had shaken the heart with pride to see them march out in the morning, 1,000 flags whipping in the poisoned breeze, and 1,000 horns sounding the advance. Then the day ended, and I saw beneath our uniforms and the color of our skin, our bones are all the same. That had been yesterday. He did something to the rain. It tastes like an alchemist's laboratory, smells, and has vastly accelerated the decomposition process. The flesh sloughs away from the bone like mud sluices away from rock in a stream, leaving behind the broken ivory and iron. I suppose it is merely another of his endless preparations for yesterday's battle, to keep the rot of 1,000,000 corpses from killing him where their blades failed. He planned for everything, it seems. I find it more likely that he enjoys the view. I can see him when I lift my gaze from beneath my sodden hood to the peak of the Black Pyramid. Only when green lightning claws through the sky, separating the false darkness from the true with a jagged spear of light, can I see the shadow that pretends to humanity's form. He stands alone, looking down on the abject ruin of a world with his eyes of ice. He stares at the twisted bodies of tens of thousands, and he does not blink. He waits, Acheron's bane sheathed on his back and his arms folded across his dark mail. The twisted skeletons of Avalon's greatest warriors and sorcerers lay around him, their skulls gaping at the broken sky. The bones of drakes and griffins decorate his fortress, discarded where they crashed after he ripped them from the sky. He waits for more to come, and we have nothing more to send. My eyes sting from the rain, and I lower my eyes back to the graveyard that threatens to steal my footing. Despite the downpour, my feet crunch into the soil where I step, because the dirt can no longer retain moisture. The land died months ago. I cannot kill him. I know this. After the slaughter of yesterday, after hearing the soul-shattering cacophony of hatred's masked champion murdering Avalon's sons, I don't think anyone can. Not even my brother. My brother. He is a flash of silver on the side of the pyramid, and I can hear him roaring in maddened grief as he pulls himself up the slick stones. As Avalon dies, Valantian's soul dies with it. As the scion, the protector of all Avalon, he alone suffers the true weight of what the everlasting dark has done. I cannot imagine his agony, nor how it must tear at his sanity. We have lost everything, and I weep. I write this now, muttering to my fey scribe as I stagger through the bones, to warn anyone who may come after us, anyone his purge has missed. Do not repeat our sins. We thought it dispelled by the strength of our light, but in truth, the dark was only ever a candle's breadth away. It lurks behind the skin of the world and strikes from the crimes we thought buried. I write this now, before I join Valantian on the altar of our ruin, to beg for forgiveness. We are sorry. Oh God, we are sorry. Last Testament of Gemelte Assyrius, High Chancellor of the Magi, brother of the Scion. Chapter 1. Arrival. No one saw things as Gideon did, and he found he liked it that way. The tiny village of Halcyon nestled at the foot of the mighty Ironback Mountains, far to the west of the continent, though not so far as to reach the sea. Farmers tilled their fields and raised strong children, who in turn tilled the fields when their fathers passed into the earth. Their crops sold well, and the town was well spoken of by the merchants who passed through. Their barns stood together in the town itself, arranged thus by the knight who founded the village for ease of defense. The inhabitants remained content with their place in the Almighty's design, never thinking to go beyond their station. Except Gideon. Gideon stabbed his pitchfork into the sweet-smelling hay, but where an ordinary farmer simply saw provender, Gideon's mind blazed with images of glory. He was an orphan adopted by farmers no more. He was a soldier of Samothrace, caught in the awful wars to the east. His unit lay dead all around him, lost in the savage melee of the past hours. His pitchfork transformed into a shining spear, and with a growl, he thrust it forward into a scabrous demon, one of the mythical invaders trying to break through the armies of Samothrace on the killing fields of Belfarak. As his young muscles bunched, Gideon hoisted the shrieking monster upward, presenting it to the throne of God, and a bolt of lightning lanced down to incinerate the creature upon the tip of his weapon. Gideon hurled the broiled carcass behind him, brandished his spear with a flourish, and roared, "Who's next?" He jerked to a stop as he met the warm brown eyes of the woman he called his mother. Talia Halcyon stood in the open door of the barn, one hand on her hip, the other resting on her very pregnant abdomen, a wry smile on her face. Gideon stumbled at the sight of her and righted himself awkwardly. He was 15 years old, but already the size of an ordinary man, and he still struggled to control his limbs. He stammered, "Mom, I am." Talia raised her hand and said, "I know. The long war against the hay continues. As long as it gets in the loft, I suppose that's all that matters." Gideon grinned sheepishly. "Yes, ma'am." She winced a little and put her hand to her swollen to her swollen belly. "Oh, this one is kicking. Why must you kick me? I haven't even done anything to you yet." The widow glanced back at Gideon. "I'm going to go sit in the house for a few minutes. See if you can't vanquish this lot in time for supper." Gideon dipped his head. "Yes, ma'am." "And remember to drink your water." "Yes, ma'am." "And wash up before you come in. I won't have you covered in the intestines or whatever of your enemies in my house." Gideon grinned. "Yes, ma'am." No one expected him. That was the point. The warband had ranged far this season, penetrating Samothrace's steel-clad battle lines to tear at the exposed hindquarters of the Empire. From the barren east, he had driven his raiders, bypassing vast prairies and rich farmlands, holding them obedient to his vision with an iron hand. Now they stood on a hill far to the west of the tainted lands of their birth, weapons held in their fists, shackles ready to cast upon the slaves of Samothrace. It required singular vision to wait so long, patiently bypassing easy prey to stab and rip where the enemy thought himself safe. His men hated him for his patience, for his vision. Aganin smiled. Below him, the village bustled about its daily activities, completely ignorant of the monster surveying them, examining them, judging them. The wind gusted through his black robes like the malice from his soul. He spoke. "Make them suffer." As soon as his words hissed through his lips like a malignant fog, 15 Jahanan maidens stepped forward and daubed thick war paint onto his warriors' bodies, inscribing hellish runes that seared the eyes to see. Huge chests, bare to the biting cold, swelled like mighty bellows and exhaled in growling huffs. Clouds of steam chugged from their mouths and noses as thoughts of the bloodshed to come coursed through their minds. He, their employer, their master, stalked before them. His soulless eyes, their irises bleached the color of milk from staring at the searing secrets of the damned, drilled each one to the ground. "Make them suffer." Nostrils flared wide, arms wrapped in muscle like bands of steel flexed, trembled. One warrior could not contain himself and shouted hoarsely, "Destroy!" In one smooth motion, inhumanly fast, Aganin, servant of Gehenna, inquisitor of the Lord of Thorns, gripped the warrior by the throat and squeezed with terrifying strength. Veins in the doomed man's head bulged out, as if trying to escape his skull, and his knees buckled beneath him. Agaddon snarled softly, yet he ensured that every warrior heard him. "No, not destroy. Suffer. Like this." The Inquisitor hissed a dark syllable, and the barbarian mercenary choked suddenly, his eyes wide. His mouth fell open, but no scream would come out. His fellows did not move, except to avert their gazes from the atrocity in front of them. Hardened warriors of Gehenna all, even they had no wish to watch the thing eating their comrades' eyes. It took 90 seconds for the man to finally die, and Aganin let the corpse slump from his grip to the earth. Goosebumps prickled his flesh as he silently offered the sensation of the man's last moments to Gehenna's distant throne. The warrior's pain was only an appetizer for the agony to come. When Gideon heard Ellen scream, he dismissed it out of mind. That idiot girl was always screaming about something. She just wanted attention, and she got far too much of it. He jammed his pitchfork back into the stack of hay and heaved another forkful in front of the horses, his back feeling little strain. He had been working the Halcyon's farm ever since the night and his wife had adopted him 4 years before. When Sir Armand died 5 months ago, he shouldered the man's burden of the farm without complaint. Gideon's body equaled many grown men in size and had grown hard with the years of labor. He knew the girls in town spoke admiringly of his build and sharp green eyes. He suspected his meddling mother had a good deal to answer for in instigating that situation, though she denied it vociferously. He did not care. Girls and their drama were not something Gideon needed in his life. He had enough to occupy him with the work on the farm and the battles of his dreams. He swiped his sweaty mop of tawny blonde hair out of his eyes and readied his pitchfork for another stab, putting Ellen's manufactured panic out of his head. When Fordred screamed, Gideon's head snapped up. Fordred never screamed. He stepped outside, pitchfork in hand, and came upon a scene from hell. Barbarians with the blood runes of Gehenna on their chests thundered through the village, hurling torches into the thatched roofs as they laughed raucously. Already, plumes of fire reached into the sky, and columns of black smoke billowed all around. Ellen ran screaming through the center of the village. Even as she ran, a mounted warrior revolved his arm around his head and snapped it forward. Ellen's legs swept out from under her, and she hit the ground hard, her legs wrapped in a bola, trailing a line of rope back to her attacker. The raider lashed the rope to his saddle horn and hauled on it, jerking Ellen back toward him. She screamed again, clawing at the earth for help. The raider laughed. Slavers. The empires of the world paid their expenses in human currency and washed the dirt from their streets in human blood and tears. But they were supposed to be a world away from here. A hoarse, sobbing cry rose from the smithy. Gideon's wide eyes glanced that way reflexively, and immediately he wished he had not. 3 of them forced Fordred's head toward his own furnace, roaring in laughter at his begging, as a 4th pumped the bellows for the flames. They were burning his face off. Ellen screamed again, and Gideon moved. "Hey!" he shouted. The raider holding Ellen's rope twisted toward him. Gideon brandished his pitchfork toward the barbarian. "Let her go!" The man brayed a laugh and wheeled his horse toward Gideon. The warrior spurred his mount to a gallop, spittle spraying from his mouth as he raised his sword above his head and angled the ragged tip at the boy, still dragging the screaming girl behind him. Gideon's mind refused to register the hundreds of pounds of horseflesh and bellowing barbarian bearing down on him. It ignored fear and sense, instead reaching for Armand's stories of warfare and how to stop a charging horseman with a spear. Gideon threw himself forward, planted the base of his pitchfork into the dirt, and ducked, wrapping himself around the handle. It was like getting hit with a cliff. A savage impact jarred Gideon's skull and smashed into his ribs, and he flew several yards to crash into the ground. His tongue flamed with pain as his teeth clamped down on it, and Gideon choked on the thick taste of blood in his mouth. His everything hurt. Stories didn't say it hurt. The barbarian's horse thrashed nearby, screaming and trying to kick away from the killing tines lodged in its chest. The motionless body of the rider sprawled beyond it, neck cocked at an impossible angle. That should have been me. The thought burned through the haze of pain, and a fleeting prayer of thanks flashed through his mind. Setting his hand against his ribs, Gideon forced himself to his feet, grimacing at the sudden stiffness of his body. Ellen sobbed on the ground nearby, and Gideon limped over to her, pulling his knife to saw through the bola wrapping her ankles. A few swift cuts, and Ellen's legs were free. "Go hide in the fields. Stay low," he said, and Ellen nodded quickly. She ran off behind the barn. More bolas whipped through the village, dragging friends to the ground. Lassos and nets fell in all directions, casting the chains of slavery onto people he had known since birth. Everywhere, the screams of family and the diabolical laughter of the raiders filled the air. What do I do now? Widow Halcyon would be alone in their home, scared, hands folded over her swollen abdomen as she shielded her unborn child. If any of the raiders entered the house. The thought of that nightmare banished his pain and forced him to his feet. The house was just ahead. His mother looked up, fear warring for control as Gideon staggered into the hut. "Oh, it's you. What is happening? Are you all right?" Gideon scanned the hut and answered. "Slavers. Jehannans." A hand rose to cover her mouth, the other instinctively covering her unborn child. One glance told him that other than being scared, she was fine. Gideon moved past her toward the fireplace. There, mounted above the stone, rested the iron sword of Armand Halcyon, Knight of Samothrace. Not a ripple of taint or a patch of rust marked the blade. His adopted father had defended the lands of men for decades against raiders and monsters with this weapon. He had died with it clamped tight in his fist only months ago, coughing his way into a grave dug by a Shaolin assassin's poisoned blade. It was the closest thing to a holy relic Gideon had ever seen. On the final day, Armand called Gideon to his bedside. Gideon had come hesitantly, feeling woefully undeserving of last words from such a warrior. The gruff knight considered the youth with his steely eyes, rhymed with grit and watery from the venom snaking its way through his veins. "Gideon," he said, "look at me, boy." Gideon had met his gaze then, the weight of the dying man's stare almost pushing him back. Sir Armand had been a forceful man on life. On the banks of the River Death, he seemed ferocious. "Take care of your mother, lad," Sir Halcyon rasped through the phlegm in his lungs. "She's yours to protect now. She took care of you. Now you take care of her. Anyone comes to take advantage, you take this sword from the fireplace. You stand in the door, and you don't move or be moved until she's safe. Am I understood, Gideon?" Gideon stared at the blade above the mantel now. In the months since Sir Armand's death, Gideon touched the blade only to wipe dust from collecting on its sacred edge. To practice with such a relic felt the worst kind of sacrilege. Outside, the sounds of terror and savagery rose. Women sobbed, slavers roared, and children shrieked. Gideon's resolve hardened, and his fingers closed around the hilt of the halcyon blade. Understood. Flames reached high into the air, as though trying to flee the madness below. The screams continued, punctuated by cracking whips as the slavers corralled the farmers and their families into milling groups of sobbing men and women, shackling them together in long roped lines while shouting obscenities at the helpless villagers and inflicting their individual sadisms on their captives. Aganin stood apart, his lifeless eyes seething. There was much suffering to be had here, yes, but nothing that one did not find every day. Nothing fit for his master, the architect of suffering. A horde of Mammon's mutants could achieve as much, and without traversing the continent. He sighed. An inquisitor could do better. Shouts descended from the northern hill, and Aganin turned to see an improbable sight. Gorak, a savage of little brain, stumbled back from the doorway of a nearby hut, clutching his midsection in horror. Aganin caught a glimpse of a foot of gleaming iron protruding from the man's back, before it disappeared out the way it came. An instant later, a gleaming arc slashed through the man's neck, and Gorak's head and body parted company. A man, no, a boy, but large for his age, stood in the doorway, feet planted, shoulders squared. He clearly meant to deny entrance to the hovel. Aganin raised an eyebrow, and even as his lips framed the curse that would kill the hapless hero, even as the demons writhed nauseatingly in his flesh as he invoked their power, the teachings of the Liber Cruciatus flashed through his mind. Every man suffers in equal measure to another, save for two: those who give life and those who preserve it. The suffering of such souls is exquisite, for they suffer not their own pain only, but of all those around them. The wise servant of the architect will give heed, and as a preparer of fine delicacies, select only the ingredients of soul torture that will produce a masterpiece fit for the Lord of Pain. The demonic syllables died stillborn on his lips. The warlock considered for a handful of seconds, then gestured brusquely. Bring him to me, alive. Gideon kicked the slaver's sagging body out of his path, flicking a long lock of blonde hair out of his eyes. More of the barbarians had seen him, as had that man with the dead eyes, and he swallowed hard, squaring his stance. Heroes and stories did this all the time. The Jahanan Inquisitor pointed toward him, snarling something gutturally. At the last second, just before the first screaming savage hefted his axe for the killing blow, a thought flashed through Gideon's mind. I hope those stories were true. Time to stop thinking. He caught the downward sweep of the axe and directed it toward the earth. His return cut slashed the man's throat clear to his spine. A roaring barbarian hurled himself forward, two wildly slashing swords scissoring in front of him. Panic-provoking response, Gideon squeezed his eyes shut, gritted his teeth, and thrust forward, his sword aimed at the man's chest. Trying to block the unexpected attack, the warrior cross-blocked the sword up into his own brainplate. Gideon jerked the sword out and span it once in front of him. I'm alive. A swell of excitement rose in his breast. If he continued like this, he could defend the doorway well enough. Maybe this wouldn't be so bad. The sword itself rebelled against him. The handle flashed white-hot, hissing in Gideon's palm before he dropped it with a yelp. Gritting his teeth in pain, Gideon looked up in time to see a hulk of a man stepping in front of him with an upraised fist. Pain. Blackness. Wake up, boy. Slowly, the murky tunnel cleared, and the world came into focus. Gideon groaned as his head pulsed like a hammer was trying to beat its way out of his skull. Before his bleary eyes, the scarlet robes of an Inquisitor of Gehenna resolved into clarity. Judging by the size and weight of the medallions and charms hanging from his neck, a well-favored one. The man fingered a fiendish chain whip, bristling with spikes and glass. His eyes, as milky as that of a blind man's, never left Gideon's own. Oh God. Beside the silent warlock stood the mountain of a man who had put the hammer in his head. Gideon's scorched hand reached for his own sword instinctively, vainly. So... The voice grated against reality, void of any shred of pity. You, alone of all these cattle, wish to play the hero. The barbarian at his side grunted derisively. The warlock ignored him. Do you know who I am? Gideon surged against the heavy hands on his shoulders, managing to gain his feet, and coming almost to eye level with the demon worshipper. Didn't know pain addicts got names. The corner of the once man's mouth turned up ever so slightly. We do not. At least not the ones we were born with. By the time we pass through our final trial, our previous lives have been scoured away, leaving only that which is pure. The Inquisitor's voice dropped to a whisper, vile in its blasphemous reverence. When we stand, raw and bleeding before the wailing throne, the Master of Pain himself looks upon the faithful, those pure enough to survive the lashes and the racks, and he gives us a new name, written down in blood and glory for the ages. The sorcerer focused on Gideon. He named me Aganin, prophesying that I would be the first to see such power as this world has never known. Do you know the name? Gideon could not have answered if he wanted to. The shock of the name coursed through his body like lightning, blanking his mind, freezing his blood, and closing his throat. He stared into the empty abyss of the fallen man's soul, even as his mind refused to accept that Aganin the Damned stood before him. What is he doing here? Aganin smiled. I see that you do. Excellent. So rewarding to know one's work is appreciated in his own time. The brute next to him grunted something too guttural for Gideon to understand, but Aganin, clearly drawing on years of experience to understand the man, nodded. Yes, bring Abram. The sight of what he could have been will be bracing. The man nodded and gestured to another slaver, who jogged away. His mouth tasted like iron and salt. Gideon grimaced and spat, his stomach roiling as he saw the ropey strand of blood drooling from his bottom lip. His head ached. His tongue was practically screaming with pain, and his sword hand was scorched and blackened, weeping blisters just beginning to form. At least my nose isn't broken. That was something. Aganin waited a few moments, observing the captive before him until Rosh returned with his ward. Abram was nearly the same age as the young man on his knees, but far thinner. The boy's eyes, far too old for his age, sunk into his skull, and he could not quite keep the trembling from his hands. Aganin could glimpse through his charge's tattered shirt a bloody patchwork of scars. Good. The boy continued his study of the arts of agony through self-flagellation. Yet, the Inquisitor squinted. Some of the scars appeared haphazard. Abram came to stand before him, shoulders slumped. The trembling worsened. Aganin let the silence stretch for a moment, relishing the boy's growing fear while also despising it as unforgivable weakness. Before he spoke, Abram. Abram bowed stiffly. His scars must have pained him as the skin of his back pulled taut, but no expression crossed his face. That, at least, the boy remembered. Your flagellations are out of alignment with the pain channels. You lack focus. Abram kept his gaze rooted to the ground as Aganin stepped behind him, not allowing any tone to creep into his voice. My lord, I sought to strike harder in order to increase my enlightenment. I lost control of my flail. Aganin raised an eyebrow at his student's statement. Without warning, his hands shot out and gripped the boy's back, thumbs spreading the skin of the lacerations wide. To Abram's credit, only a faint of pain escaped his tightly pressed lips. For long seconds, Aganin probed several wounds with his rough hands, studying his student's handiwork with a critical eye. Finally, the warlock leaned back and rasped, Your enthusiasm is commendable, young initiate. Yet in your exuberance, you have fallen prey to a common error among the followers of Gehenna. Here, he jabbed a thumb into a deeper cut on Abram's back, and here, you have struck hard enough to cause damage to the holy vessels of pain, diminishing their capacity for sensation. Abram, tongue bleeding from where he had bitten it, choked, and without sensation, we are nothing. Aganin nodded, pleased with his student's recitation. From his belt pouch, he pulled a leather strap with strange thorns studding the length. I cannot fault you for your zeal. Take. The demon worshipper tossed the vicious lash to his protege, who snatched it out of the air greedily. Had he been capable, Aganin would have smiled at Abram's almost unseemly eagerness. The lad at his feet, however, did not see the value of this moment. What is he so happy about? Aganin answered while watching Abram twine the new lash with the others. The addition of a new lash to an acolyte's flail means another step along the path to the shedding of self. This particular lash bears the thorns of the bloodfire bush. Each stripe with his flail will now burn for hours, enhancing his suffering and bringing him closer to the truth. The boy glared at him with disgust. And that is... Aganin turned to face him, the corners of his mouth twitching upward despite himself, and breathed. All is pain. Around him, the barbarians bowed their heads and droned. All is pain. Still staring at his captive, Aganin gestured. Bring the slaves. I wish to show a thing. Gideon knew he was going to die. The acolytes of Gehenna were fanatics and torturers, raiding villages and towns for victims and sacrifices to their dark god, the architect of suffering. Strangely, the thought of his own death failed to shake him. He only hoped he met it honorably, with no cowardice to stain his soul at the end, like the stories. But when the line of shackled slaves stumbled to a halt before the damned Inquisitor, his hands began to shake. Folks he had known his entire life huddled together, their faces tear-stained and grimy, the women and small ones crying softly. Many of the men joined them in weeping, either in anger or horror. The rest tried to shield their families from the hulking barbarians that lashed out with stinging whips or crushing blows. Halcyon's widow stood in the line with cruel iron shackles on her wrists, cradling her belly gently. They had already fitted her with the slaver's collar, and the heavy yoke bowed her thin shoulders, absurdly oversized for her small frame. The instant he saw her so callously treated, a shock ran through his body, rushing through his veins till Gideon gritted his teeth with the intensity of it. The portion of his mind able to retain reason noted with some alarm this new emotion, and tried to warn it away, desperate to preserve its existence. It was like spitting into a hurricane. Never in his life had Gideon desired to kill a man more than at that moment. His breath became harsh in his lungs, and his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. Before he realized it, a ferocious prayer had formed in his mind. God, one. Give me just one of them. A second later, the one Aghanim had called Abram glanced at him, sneered, and kicked at his stomach. With a growl of hate that surprised even him, Gideon doubled over, trapping the acolyte's foot into his gut and twisting savagely. With a cry of alarm, the initiate pitched to the ground, pinwheeling his arms for balance. Gideon rolled to his knees over the other teen and powered his fist into Abram's face. More than a decade of fieldwork hardened muscle slammed into the acolyte's jaw, breaking teeth and splitting his lip. Then it hit again. Again. Enormous hands covered in hair ripped Gideon off of the bleeding boy, pinning his arms to his side even as he raged, still trying to reach his target. Through the fury pounding in his head, Gideon could hear uproarious laughter, and he exploded again, thrashing in the barbarian giant's steel grip. He only succeeded in making them laugh harder. The acolyte named Abram staggered to his feet, one hand cupping his broken jaw, the other pointing at Gideon as he shrieked, "Kill him!" Abram's eyes went wide at the sudden burst of pain as the shattered bones of his chin ground together, and he howled anew, falling to his knees, which set the slavers to greater heights of hilarity. Several raiders imitated his girlish squeals and sobs, and one man fell over into the dirt, holding his sides as he roared his amusement. Aghanim stalked over to his crying protege and gripped him around his purpling jaw with an iron hand. As the bones grated, Abram's eyes went wild, but the fear of his master overcame even his pain. His voice tight, Aghanim rasped, "Control yourself, boy, and offer your pain to the god of agony." He turned back to Gideon, still grinding Abram's jaw. "We do not serve the darkness through the precepts of mammon, sating endless hunger, nor do we kill for death's sake, as a Shaolin priest. We honor a far more refined intellect than that. So do not believe that you will earn a merciful death from your actions." Gideon glared at him, spitting. "I don't want your mercy, demon." Aghanim dropped his acolyte and strode to the line of slaves, speaking as though Gideon had not. "Had you studied your Liber Cruciatus in depth, apprentice, you would know that while a certain visceral enjoyment may be extracted from torturing such a courageous individual, such pleasures are banal and fleeting, fodder for the less educated, such as these servants here." He gestured with blackened fingers toward the savage brutes beside him. "But when one is old and can do naught but reflect back on his time of service, what shall he say? 'I remember how I tortured that great man,' or 'I broke her will in 7 hours.' I, Aghanim the Damned, say no." He paused in front of certain slaves, grasped one by the chin, and turned her head from side to side as though she were a horse for sale. The warlock tutted in disappointment and continued. Such is not a sacrifice fitting for the master of pain. No, to truly distinguish oneself in the eyes of our Lord, one must exercise a degree of creativity. Agonon's dark eyes locked with Gideon's on the last word, and the boy's blood ran cold. A dark horror uncoiled in his gut as he realized that every ear, barbarian and townsperson alike, had turned to hear the words of the Inquisitor with rapt attention. And so, I will not lay a single brand to this lad's skin. Not a lash, not a thorn, not a crossword. But I will break him, and his suffering will be wine of a superior vintage on the tongue of he who sits on the wailing throne. One of the barbarians ventured. How, great one? Agonon turned and smirked. He is a hero. Heroes must protect. With a striking motion, quick as a viper, Agonon spun, jerked Talia Halcyon out of the line, and slammed a clawed hand into her lower belly, penetrating, lifting, and crushing with the blow. Time froze. His mouth bulged in shock. The air exploded from her lungs in a terrible groan as she collapsed to the ground, arms hugging her abdomen in a belated attempt to protect her unborn child. Agonon, hands drawing back, still curled into that dreadful claw, stepping as the stricken woman folded at his feet. Abram's wide-eyed gaze, taking it all in with lips slightly parted, his short, panting breaths of excitement. Gideon did not even know he was screaming. His young body surged against his captors with desperate strength, actually breaking loose of their vice-like grips before the surprised brutes adjusted their holds. His feet clawed at the ground, digging furrows into the soft earth as he willed himself to be Talia's crumpled body. He could hear his own stricken shrieks echoing off of the mountains, waves of denial and anguish combining and slashing through his soul with relentless agony. One thought pierced the cacophony in his mind. I failed. Agonon the Damned closed his eyes as he laid a gentle hand on Abram's shoulder and whispered, Now that is suffering. Minutes passed, stretched into years. Gideon lay in the dirt on his stomach, spent and hoarse, the knee of a slaver pressed down upon his back. His mother wept on her side, rocking back and forth as she clutched at her stomach. Agonon stood next to Abram, arms crossed, his clerical garment wafting in the wind. Gideon heard him speaking quietly. Be certain when performing rupturing bowels to strike low and penetrate toward the target's diaphragm. The more crushing the blow, the more deformed the fetus, and when the female passes the detritus, the pain shall be renewed. Helpless with the grief and rage rushing through his system like a flooding river, Gideon closed his eyes. God! The single word was so choked with betrayed hurt. It was an effort to think it. How can you allow this? Agonon took a step back, then forward, thrusting with clawed hand as Abram awkwardly copied him. I thought you would see. I thought you would know. Why can't you stop it? The widow rolled into her back, sobbing into the sky. Gideon clenched his eyes shut, unable to watch her anymore as he thought one last forbidden thought. Do you even care? He instinctively banished the unfamiliar thought, but it rushed back, battering his faith with the evidence before his eyes. He had been taught his whole life that the Father cared. All the stories said so. A traitorous, blasphemous voice whispered to him, Would a caring God allow this? Gideon groaned. The urge to give in overpowered him. Face it, the stories were wrong. There is no all-powerful, invisible fairy of a god standing ready to save you from evil. Gideon shook his head in weak denial at the insistent voice. Look, this is what the gods do. While you pretend to be a hero and pray to the nothing in the sky, this is where true power lies. Embrace it or live under its heel. There is nothing else. And for a terrible instant, Gideon wavered. To believe or not to believe. To cast aside a life's worth of faith and embrace this reality, or hold true to some deluded, fanciful, naive notion that God cared. I refuse. Within his shattered soul, something hardened, as though an emotional jaw clenched in determination. I will not accept that this is all there is. I will believe you, Father. Save us. Aganin considered the day and felt a warm glow of satisfaction with the results. Abram had learned many valuable lessons. He would be ready to join the inquisitorial scholastica soon. Suffering had been dealt, both in quality and quantity. Gehenna's unholy name had been written in blood, rending sacrificial victims and screams, and praised under the open sun. Yes, a good day. Aganin turned to his second to order the slaves moved out, when he hesitated. The words died in his mouth as he detected something subtle, infinitely subtle, foundational. Something had just shifted. He glanced at the boy on the ground. Seconds ago, his eyes had held the look of the crushed, broken, and defeated. Aganin's victims all looked that way when he finished with them. Not anymore with this one. The boy's gaze was expectant, as if anticipating something. A distant tremor moved through the air, kicking up a small gust that whispered past his ears. A rumble sounded in the distance, from the west, and Aganin turned quizzically toward the sound. One of the stars over the mountains seemed brighter, almost as if it were approaching. He glanced back at the boy and met the cold fury in his emerald eyes. The young man had the look of a wronged one watching a prisoner meet his fate at the headman's axe. Uncertainty sank its claws into him for an instant, and he shook it off angrily, breaking away from the grim judgment in that look. The chieftain Rosh came to him, something like fear in his eyes. "My lord?" "I am no superstitious savage, swayed by tricks of the weather." Aganon sneered at the man. "It is nothing more than wind and thunder. Cinch your loinstraps tighter, or find me a man to lead." The brute bristled at the insult, but sullenly stepped away. Another rumble. An explosion, this time. Louder. Closer. Aganon squinted at the strange star. It was growing brighter. "What in the name of the three thrones is that?" And larger. "That is not a star." In the blink of an eye, a mountain burning with hellish fury barreled overhead, ripping the very breath from their lungs with the force of his passage, leaving a long trail of fire behind. An enormous thunderclap shook the insides of every human being beneath as the air rushed back in its wake, the two fronts crashing together like two mighty armies on the charge. The falling mass roared as it fell, zeroing in on its diminutive counterpart still rooted in the earth. With a titanic collision, the comet smashed into the mountain, shearing half the stalwart peaks off completely and powdering the remainder. It punched straight through, impacting on the ground beyond the mountain and throwing every man standing to the earth. The two barbarians had been standing on Gideon's shoulders with their boots, one with his knee on Gideon's back. When the earth bucked beneath them, however, it hurled them from their feet and into a pile of stone masonry nearby, cracking their skulls silently. The quake did not discriminate between inquisitors or slaves, but cast them all down in its rage. The ruin of their mountain protected them from the fury of the burning meteor, deflecting the destructive force and causing it to flow over and around the village, though it howled like the battle cry of God himself. The shaking and roaring continued for long seconds, unmanning the burliest warrior, and caused them all, savage and slave alike, to clutch one another and cry out. Of them all, only two were without fear. Aganin snarled as he lay prone, gripping the rebellious earth in an attempt to stabilize his position. The second was the boy. Aganin glanced at him sharply in the cacophony, and though the lad clutched at the ground to steady himself, his fierce gaze never left the helpless inquisitor. Once he knew that Aganin saw him, his lips moved silently amidst the destructive cacophony around them. I asked for this. Aganin glared back, teeth bared, clawed hands clutching the ground. It would take more than an assault of the sky to fell Gehenna's mightiest servant. As suddenly as it began, the noise and shaking stopped. The silence itself was almost as deafening as the blast. A thick curtain of dust hung in the air, obscuring the warlock's vision and clogging his throat. Coughs and cries for help echoed in the gloom. One of his warriors tried to stand, but his knees failed him, weakened by the trauma, and he fell back to the earth. So they remained on the ground, breathing hard, calling out to various heathen gods and trying to gather their strength. 13 mighty warriors and an inquisitor, reduced to the level of the slaves, unable to stand, lying or kneeling in various abased positions. It was it was unconscionable. It was not right. Crunch, 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 crunch. Aganin's mind struggled to process what he was hearing. He, Aganin the Damned, Inquisitor of Gehenna and recipient of the sole prophecy spoken by the Master of Pain in more than 1,000 years, could not even stand, and yet somehow someone's boots crunched the broken ground in even, controlled steps. With each footfall, chainmail clinked. A slight cough echoed through the gloom, along with a casual clearing of the throat. Aganin lifted himself to his knees, managing to get one foot beneath him. Unholy spirits writhed in his flesh as he dragged strength from them and poured it into his limbs. Familiar nausea wrenched his gut, and the shock of it caused him to fall to his knees yet again. As he knelt, a shadow appeared in the fog. The first thing he saw was black. Aganin's eyes were irresistibly drawn to the darkness that wrapped around the man's form in fading tendrils, rendering him ghostly, ethereal, a shade. With an effort, the Inquisitor blinked and refocused, realizing that the darkness wreathing the stranger was nothing more than black chainmail, but so black that all light that fell onto its surface could not reflect, could not escape. The second thing Aganin saw were his eyes. They were a light blue, like ice from the northern regions, so cold and intense that they seemed to be afire. They pierced everything they saw, and when they fell upon him, Aganin felt himself almost impaled upon the spear of his regard. Wresting himself away from the power of that man's stare, Aganin noticed other features. A single weapon, a curved blade, rested in a black sheath across the man's shoulders. His white hair fell to the middle of his back, gathered with a clip depicting a stylized raven. His hands and feet were sheathed in the same dark mail as his body, and a simple hooded black cloak hung from his shoulders, halting at mid-calf. The man stopped a few yards from the assembly. His eyes flickered like hidden flames, and they continuously wandered over the landscape, like an animal out of its lair, surveying its surroundings. A bird chirped nearby, and the stranger's head cocked slightly to the side, almost quizzically. The sight of this behavior bled away the weakness in his knees, and Aganin rose to his feet, gathering his poise and power to him with the simple gesture. On his own feet, in the quiet aftermath of the devastating assault, the dark stranger no longer seemed a threat. Aganin had seen such behavior in new acolytes as they entered the dungeons of Hinnom for the very first time, wide eyes taking in every fresh detail, trying to fit themselves into the surreal strangeness around them. This man did the same. Aganin grunted in amusement as his men rose around him to face the newcomer. He turned to the prone boy and rasped, "This is what you asked for?" Chuckling harshly, he turned back. The stranger was gone. Aganin blinked. Where did he? A low crunch sounded from his right, and the Inquisitor turned to see a huge, bare-chested warrior named Eric sag to his knees, eyes dulling, blood spilling from his mouth. His spear was missing. What? A malicious whisper slashed through the air just by his ear, and he jerked away instinctively as the crump of collapsing armor and a grunt exploded from his left. Another of his men clutched in horror at Eric's spear, now protruding from his own abdomen and pinning him to the ground like an insect ready for examination. Aganin glanced around furtively. There was nothing there! Rosh reacted first. To the horses! He roared, the veins standing out in his neck, and the barbarians bellowed in response, trying to banish their fear with rage. In a milling horde, roughly 20 burly slavers rushed for their animals, miraculously still tied to their posts and terrified. Abram tried to run with them, but Aganin slammed a hand onto his shoulder. His milky eyes narrowed, trying to pierce the fog. He rasped, No, apprentice. Watch first. A swift-footed tribesman named Ord broke free of the pack by a good 10 yards and launched himself onto his horse with a single leap. It was an impressive jump, one very few warriors could repeat, and the heart of every slaver who saw him lifted at the sight of Ord rearing his horse back, axe slicing through the air in defiance. Until the stranger killed him. Aganin saw it happen. Ord was still rearing back in his saddle when a dark shadow leapt up toward him. Ord could not even scream as the danger arced over him like a raptor from Nightmare, over the rearing horse's head, and ripped the man out of his saddle by his throat. The killer landed into a crouch and slammed Ord's skull into the ground with a thud, fracturing the back of the man's skull and pulping his brain. The slavers were only just beginning to arrest their forward momentum because no one can do that, when the stranger darted forward and snatched Krill away into the fog, leaving only the man's screams with them. At his side, Abram's breath came short and fast, and for once, Aganin did not fault him. This invader killed his men with the ease of a hawk slaughtering doves. They had not just failed to scratch their murderer, they had yet to swing a weapon. Several warriors made as though to pursue into the fog, but Rosh barked hoarsely, No! Stay together, by the gods, or he'll kill you one by one! As if to punctuate the chieftain's command, Krill's screams abruptly ended. The warriors instinctively drew together in a circle, eyes darting everywhere as the fog seemed to draw in closer. Seconds were passing, each one dragging out for an eternity as they strained their eyes, their ears, their minds for any sign, anything that the killer was nearby. All Aganin heard was dark laughter. Gideon sprawled on the ground, within yards of the Jehanan warlock. The Inquisitor and his protege remained frozen in place, only Aganin's lips working as he intoned blasphemous incantations. He was as blind as the rest of them. He could barely see the group of frightened barbarians as they slowly circled, desperate to find their killer. One of them, the big one called Rosh, bellowed into the dense fog, trying through savage bravado to banish the phantoms he saw in the clinging mist. Patience. Gideon froze. That thought had not come from his mind. It had a foreign taint to it, almost as if another man's tongue had grown within his mouth and spoken the word. It felt intrusive, repulsive. And it continued, every word spoken with sinister intent. All men fear judgment. The darker the sin, the greater their fear. Gideon felt paralyzed. He knew, he just knew, that somehow he heard the thought of the killer's mind. These know more than most, for they have allied themselves with the damned. These, above all, are familiar with the fires of perdition that await their bartered souls. Their knowledge alone condemns them to far greater torment. The group grew agitated with the absence of activity in the wake of their comrades' deaths. Some began to edge toward their horses, while others glanced back at Rosh, uncertain, their unity fractured. patience. Allow them their fear. Make them cower before the fog of the unknown wherein lies their death, and the shadow that heralds their final judgment. Let them fear the dark and the fire. Soon they shall know nothing else. The voice rasped now, infecting Gideon with a hate foreign to his own heart. See the dawning of comprehension upon their faces as they realize the imminence of their end. Enjoy the games fearful souls play, the desperate bargains they attempt to stave off their own oblivion. Most of all, savor their pathetic denial of the inevitable as they clutch to retain something they never before appreciated or understood. A chilling chuckle echoed through Gideon's captive mind, becoming audible, just as he saw a shadow slowly rising from the ground in their unknowing midst. It coalesced with a deliberate lack of haste into a nightmare with eyes of burning sapphire, hand sliding forward to reach for one of their number. Whatever fool penned that patience was a virtue, never indulged in the vice. Aganon watched, disbelieving, as the stranger tore Rosh off of his feet and snapped his neck with a brutal wrench. His fellows reacted with shock, twisting to confront the newfound threat, but far, far too slowly. By the time their eyes focused on the shadowy killer, his clawed hands slashed through the air, sending two slavers staggering backward with weeping rents where their throats used to be. Unable to retain their courage with their champion dead and the windpipes of their comrades clenched in the mailed fists of a wraith, the circle broke. Barbarian warriors scattered in all directions as the black warrior flicked his wrists casually and dusted the palms of his hands together. Aganon, gut clenching as demons poured their power into him, summoned an orb of flame in his hand and roared, "He is one man! Kill him!" With that, Aganon hurled the potent sphere at the newcomer, grinning fiercely through his nausea as the devastating energy burned through the air. Such a spell had burnt great holes within phalanxes of shielded men. The orb struck the black warrior with a clap and exploded, dousing the area around him with roaring flames and staggering the man forward. Aganon grinned ferociously. No matter what he thought himself to be, this newcomer could not hope to withstand the sheer might granted to an inquisitor. With a sudden intake of wind, the flames raging around the warrior sucked into the dark depths of his armor and vanished. The stranger turned to Aganon and locked his icy gaze on him. In a panic, Aganon reached out and subsumed the minds of his fleeing warriors. Demonic power writhed in his veins, but Aganon clenched his teeth against the agony and crushed his warriors' wills with ruthless focus, replacing their impulse to flee with the unstoppable urge to kill. With a precision they had never before experienced, each warrior turned and charged the black stranger with no thought of survival. Only when the first had reached him, swinging his axe with every intention of bisecting his target, did the killer draw his sword. The blade was a lance of darkness as the warrior sidestepped and whipped it across the slaver's throat. A shriek erupted as the man fell. Aganon blinked. Dead men could not utter sounds, much less force them from cut throats. The blade flashed again, and another dead man screamed. As the stranger slew more of his warriors, he realized that it was not they that cried out. The timber changed with every slash, the pitch with every thrust. The black sword screamed like a banshee choir as it killed Agonon's men. When the last of his tribesmen collapsed to the ground, victim of the shrieking sword, the newcomer examined the blade, his eyes seemingly lost in contemplation for a few seconds. The wails increased in pitch, and Aganon swore to himself that he could hear the terrified cries of his own men joining the chilling chorus of screams. As though waking from his reverie, the man shook his head and sheathed the dark blade, silencing the horrible cries of the damned. Breathing hard, the Inquisitor thrust forward with both hands, expending all of his power to call the roots of the ground to wrap themselves around the stranger's limbs and hold him fast. The roots did not stop the man's approach in the slightest. They withered, fell to ash, and blasted into powder, before the heavy tramp of his boot scattered them to the winds. Drained by his expenditure, Aghanim could only collapse to his knees before the dark warrior, who regarded him for a moment with disdain. After that moment, he held up his hand, and a familiar orb of flame guttered to life. With a deep, cultured voice with a hint of foreign accent, the stranger spoke. You dropped this. Aghanim stared at him. It had taken him 20 years to learn that spell, more to harness the winds of destructive energy. And even then, he had never been able to hold it for more than a second. Such force had to be released, or it would melt through the caster's own hand. Yet here the stranger stood, with the exact spell hovering gently in his palm, and no harm done. Aghanim whispered, "What are you?" The stranger kneeled down, still holding the orb, and gripped Aghanim's head by the hair. "I am your bane, demon worshipper. You think because you begged hard enough and hoard your soul away, you have power. You could have been something that the fallen ones themselves feared, and yet you chose this pathetic existence, living off the kitchen scraps of cast-out exiles. Your kind disgust me." As his grip tightened on Aghanim's hair and arched his head back, the orb began to burn more fiercely. "I find it despicable that vermin such as you infests this world, filling it with your submission." The sphere was spinning fiercely now, its light flashing across Aghanim's face as a charging sound began to build. Aghanim stared at it with horrid fascination, waiting for it to overload with the power being dumped into it. But it continued to build until a miniature sun blazed in the palm of the man's hand. With undisguised hate, the stranger growled, "I am judgment. I am extinction. I am Ashkelon, the last of Allah. And those abominations you pray to, I prey upon." In the instant before he thrust the supercharged sphere into Aghanim's chest, a single thought, a memory of a prophecy, flashed through Aghanim's mind, existing for less than a second as his body ignited from the burning torrent, boiling his blood to steam. "You will see power." Gideon squinted against the churning maelstrom of fire engulfing the Inquisitor. His skin felt the heat even from this distance, yet the black silhouette stood unmoving, stark against the screaming inferno at his feet. By rights, the man should have been unconscious from the agony already. High pain tolerance, Gideon thought grimly. Without warning, the burning warlock lurched to his feet, limbs wheeling about him in flames, and dashed into the hills, vanishing into the dust until all that remained of him were his cries of horror. Without a word, their savior, the man calling himself Ashkelon, turned and walked away. Grunting against the pain in his side, Gideon limped as fast as he could to catch up to the taller man. "Thank you, Lord, for saving us," he called out. The stranger stopped and turned. Ice-blue eyes knifed into Gideon, as the silhouette regarded him, almost as a lion with a kill might regard a coyote. "What makes you think I saved you?" Gideon blinked. Of all the responses he had imagined, that was not it. Ashkelon cocked his head to one side. "Your village has been annihilated, and the vast majority of your men are dead. The remainder are either too old, too young, too cowardly to be of any use. Your crops are ash in the wind, and your animals are dead or fled." He pointed. "From the height of the 6 stalks of grain that survived, I would assume you are a month away from harvest, or would have been. What part of this constitutes salvation for you?" Gideon opened his mouth, then closed it. The stranger arched an elegant eyebrow. "I am waiting." Stubbornly, Gideon jutted his chin forward. "We're still free. We have you to thank for that." The man glanced around pointedly. Fires raged on bare earth from the sorcerous conflict. The bodies of farmers and barbarians mixed where they fell on the ground. The fields were black where they did not still burn, and the air choked with ash. It looked like a volcano had gone off. Gideon swallowed. Hard. Ashkelon looked back and smiled. You are welcome. He turned to leave, but Gideon called out, Can you not stay and help us, hero? Pausing, the stranger shook his head slowly, disbelievingly. Your definition of heroism is as skewed as your perception of salvation, if you believe I am such a person. Again, boy, I did not come here to save you. Gideon persisted. But you did. The stranger grunted. In passing, perhaps. I prolonged your miserable lives long enough to starve or freeze in this wilderness. Such is the reward of freedom, I suppose. You had best enjoy every second. Gideon had trouble understanding half of the words the man said, and the accent made it worse. Stoically, Gideon repeated, Help us, please. I will not. The sparing of peasants' lives as a result of a minor indulgence in killing a demon worshipper does not confer responsibility upon me to sustain those lives. I came here to seek out the great heroes of your world and engage them in conversation. This last he said with a sardonic smile. Gideon blinked. We have no great heroes. Ashkelon chuckled. I have been here less than 10 minutes and seen a stripling make demands of a dark sorcerer for the sake of his people after surviving a slavers' raid commanded by a man under the sway of the powers of hell. I believe that the law of averages dictates that there be others like you. Gideon was almost shaking with his need to get this man to help. The stranger sighed. Very well. Take your people and walk that way. He pointed east. The wind has carried the dust and its poison away from the waters in that direction. Many of the animals will also have fled in that direction and likely congregate at the water there. Your journey will be arduous, but leave the injured and the old, and you should survive. Gideon glared at him. We will not do that. The sorceress smiled. Then die. I do not care either way. He turned away and began walking, iron-shod boots crushing the ash beneath his feet. Gideon squinted. That's the other way. The opposite direction of what you told us. The stranger did not even turn. You seek life and the means to continue it. We differ greatly in that respect. Man, these chapters feel long. See if I can do another one. See? Everybody look at Louis' art. It's so good. That's Ashkelon. It is gorgeous. But no one tell him, because then he'll raise his prices. And it'll just be a pain trying to get stuff. All right. Doesn't look like anybody's watching live yet. Let's see if we can do another chapter and do it in less than an hour. Chapter 2. Quest. If you guys haven't noticed, I haven't really nailed Ashkelon's voice down yet, so I'm like experimenting. This is disappointing. The old refrain echoed through his mind as Ashkelon glided to the side, easily avoiding the hacking lunge of his doomed assailant. The wretch cried out in feigned battle rage, as if he had any idea what pure rage was, and backhanded his axe toward Ashkelon's midsection. Ashkelon sighed and stepped deeply to his right as though in the midst of a waltz. He watched the axe blade swing wide to crash into the stone wall of the tower, spraying chips of metal and stone across the spiral staircase. Off balance as the man was, Ashkelon stepped forward and thrust his palm into the man's shoulder, spilling him down the stairs in the clatter of armor. No harm done. Yet. Out of breath and gasping, the soldier pushed himself to his feet and charged up the stairway, his ill-fitting armor hampering his progress. This man obviously served as some kind of captain by the useless ornamentation on his imitation silver armor. He was also 3 levels below the rest of his men, and likely on his way out of the tower when he ran into his current foe. Ashkelon shook his head, waited patiently till the man reached him, and kicked his shoulder. Down the stairs the coward crashed. After his limbs finally stopped flopping over one another, Ashkelon waited for the would-be hero to get up. And he waited. Nothing moved with the man's chest as he struggled to draw breath while lying face down on the floor. The corners of Ashkelon's mouth turned down. By the dark, this world is pathetic. The soldier lifted his head and stared at Ashkelon, chest heaving. I can't beat you. You too? Ashkelon stepped down the stairs slowly, his dark mail clinking with every footfall. Yes, I know. Competent. Fast. Articulate. As a general rule, if you cannot speak your mind in one breath, do not bore the rest of us. The captain fell into instant silence. He did not reach for his weapon. Ashkelon sighed again. Are you getting up or not? The soldier paused, weighing the best answer that would allow him to continue his flight. Ashkelon's eyes narrowed at that. Your parody of existence is now over. On your feet or on your back, it makes no difference to me. Ashkelon lifted his hand before him, and a nexus of thrashing darkness swirled to life in his palm. The soldier's eyes widened in shock, and he began scrabbling backward, moaning, No, please. Fear had a certain flavor to it. Ashkelon fed the spell in his gauntlet with a mix of fear and his own revulsion, adding emotional energy in doses with the sensitivity of a chef seasoning a steak. Consider this mercy. Ashkelon thrust his hand forward in a claw and launched the dark orb, ribbons of black trailing back to his eyes and mouth. The nexus itself punched into the screaming soldier's chest, and while no results were immediately visible, the spiritual effects were disastrous. Faint blue energy coursed along the dark strands back to Ashkelon, who inhaled and drank it as though it were rare wine. The nameless coward collapsed to his knees, his skin drying, wrinkling, flaking off even as his muscles rotted on his bones. The shrieks faded to hoarse gasps as his vocal cords grew brittle and his lungs failed. If anyone alive had remained in the room, they would still hear faint screaming echoing from the strands, and believe with horror that the sorcerer consumed the man's soul. Unfair, and to be honest, simplistic. Ashkelon had no ability to consume a soul, Eternal's definition being what it was, but life energy, that was something altogether different. The predators of hell that men called vampires effected a crude version of this ritual by feeding on the blood of their victims. Ashkelon had taken the method, dispensed with the feral components and theatrics, and refined it to this catastrophic version. Ashkelon's spell simply released all of the life energy in the man's individual cells and passed it through a conduit back into Ashkelon himself, replenishing his own. Any scholar of science with the appropriate equipment could do the same. The screaming itself was only a byproduct of the energy displacing the air as it flowed back into the caster. Nothing hellborn or evil about it. Ashkelon merely collected the man's waste energy, in this case the entire man, and recycled it to better purpose. It served infinitely more use than leaving a rotting corpse on the ground. Yet, no one will thank me for my efforts at conservation. The thought pleased him. His laughter ringing off of the stone walls, the onyx mage strode back up the stairs into the tower to continue his search, leaving the soldier's desiccated body on the floor to stare in silent horror. In his ascent, Ashkelon came across more bodies, killed in more mundane, widely accepted ways. Sword slashes, stab wounds, and claw rakes appeared to be the order of the day. Society preferred such wasteful slaughter to his own method. Ashkelon shook his head at the unending predictability of it all as he walked. As far as strongholds of evil went, this one was fairly standard. A mote of fire, bestial and demonic minions of the lower orders, dungeon after dungeon with macabre implements of torture, and a sense of pervasive darkness that sucked at the soul. Standard issue for the warlocks of Sinai. He should know. In the last 5 years, he had visited a good number of them. Ashkelon sighed deeply, sinking into a mild state of depression. No innovation remained, just a series of defected copies of copies, reading the same books again and again for secrets that had never been there. The same imagination also lacked in the forces of false light, flashy silver armor without a mark on it, newly forged swords hawked at a premium from cheap street vendors, forced battle cries from pitifully young throats imitating fairy tales in a vain attempt to manufacture courage. His black soul ached for Avalon. In days long since past, days when a lone warrior, bearing the scars of 100 wars, stalked through the endless stairways, throwing down demon after demon without a trace of fear, girded in righteousness, the unthinking hatred for evil his only defense, his courage a mere afterthought. Days worthy of darkness. But this, the world of Sinai, as the inhabitants called it, demonstrated a singular lack of anything Ashkelon might call heroism. For the last 5 years, he had stalked the main continent, walking the shadows of its kingdoms. The primary bastion of men called itself Samothrace, a city of towers and palaces situated on a bay. Armies marched from its gates in constant succession, always toward the east. He had found nothing remarkable in the place. It was man's greatest city only because it was the last to be consumed. To the east, he had searched the hellscape of Belfarak. Sulphur rose in wisps from the trenches as men fought and died in whole companies against siege-breaker beasts and heaving masses of slaves. He found nothing worthy of notice in that desperate war either. By his reckoning, that stalemate would end in months, and not in humanity's favor. Far to the east, straining to break through Samothrace's defense lines, the devastated lands of the three architects. 3 exiles from the Celestial Rebellions had fallen here, and the lost and damned gathered themselves to their banners. Sheol, architect of death. Gehenna, architect of suffering. Mammon, architect of hunger. Ashkelon's lip twisted at the memory of pacing those vile lands and seeing the sycophancy of its citizens. It irked his dark soul to see humanity in servitude to such abominations. Avalon had extradited its supernatural refugees generations before. Ashkelon had personally seen to many himself. The fact that the men of Sinai struggled to do so rankled. He stepped over a man's body, his nose wrinkling as he did so. Unwashed, yet awash in liquor. Given to his own vices and come to punish another man for the same. Let them both rot. Ashkelon was here for neither. The crashes of combat echoed down the stairs. Metal struck metal, the sound ringing off the stone walls of the keep, and mixing with snaps and snarls from summoned denizens of the underworld. Ashkelon's ears attuned to the clamor with the experience of centuries, parsing the disparate sounds and categorizing them appropriately. One combatant, wielding sword and shield. He was beset by beasts and a handler, if the whip cracks were anything to go by. It would end soon, by Ashkelon's judgment. Whatever soldier had made it to the chamber above had done well to make it this far through the tower, particularly after the evident incompetence of his fellows, but mere seconds remained in that life story. Ashkelon shrugged slightly, his expression more disappointed at this waste of time than anything else, and turned away. A voice lifted above the hellish cacophony, a war shout apart from the roars and curses otherwise filling this pathetic keep. The sound of it arrested Ashkelon, causing him to turn back and consider the sound. In Ashkelon's considerable experience, men made many different sounds before they died. The spectrum ranged from silent sighs to full-throated shrieks, with sobbing, weeping, babbling, moaning, whining, gasping, snarling, and 100 other expressions a man's soul might vomit in his final seconds. This one, though, The timbre of the voice was something apart from the ordinary. The voice held fear in it, itself an indication of sanity, but tempered by anger. Furthermore, the sounds of the strikes of his weapon indicated discipline rather than panic or savagery. A beast screamed, and the voice roared in triumph. Ashkelon stared up the stairs, his skin prickling with the sound. Surely not. Memories surged unbidden of 100 battlefields. On each, a shout echoed through eons in defense of humanity itself against the exiled predators beyond the veil of material reality. As each hero banished another twisted invader from hell, that shout marked the victory of the righteous. It erupted from the mouth of the warrior fighting for his life above. It was the first of his kind Ashkelon had encountered on Sinai, and he had killed enough of them to know what one sounded like. The snarls grew louder, snapping Ashkelon out of his reverie. A cry of pain exploded from above, bitten off in gritted teeth. At the sound, a cloud of shadow billowed around his jaw, snapping into solidity as a war mask encasing the lower half of his face. His features shrouded, Ashkelon stepped into the shadows, striping the wall next to him, and lunged up the crumbling staircase toward another, crossing 10 yards in the blink of an eye. Upon reaching that shadow, he leapt again, the sound that of a bitter wind howling through a cave. The Shadow Walkers had been myths among Ashkelon's own people. They could strike from anywhere a shadow was cast, cross unimaginable distances in no time at all, and still remain hidden from pursuit. Worshippers of the everlasting dark they had been, destroyed or imprisoned by the champions of the light in ages past. All but one. Shedding the darkness for the light once more, Ashkelon burst from the mouth of the stairway into a circular room filled with open cages. Kennel. Wolves with sickly yellow eyes, weeping sulfur, jerked toward him at the intrusion, and a beast-like mutant bearing various signs of self-mutilation brayed in alarm. Ashkelon's gaze raked across the room. He assessed and dismissed the corrupted monsters rushing toward him. Their diminished souls would soon no longer clutter this mortal realm. He searched instead for the one he had spent years He found him. A young man stood at the opposite end of the room, near the stairway to the master's throne room. The pack of wolves slunk towards him, ears back and fangs bared. He stood tall in the face of the demons, his stance square. His armor had nearly shredded from his broad frame, and his shield bore nicks and gouges from heavy use. His long blonde hair hung loose, a sweaty thatch that whipped around his face as he looked from foe to foe. He lunged forward and slammed a broken blade into a wolf's ribs. As the creature shrieked and fell, claws scrabbling at the stones, another of the pack leapt onto his shoulder from the side. Ashkelon expected him to die. Most men would have fallen to the ground from the impact, trying to keep the creature's snapping jaws from wrenching their throats out. Disappointment welled up within him. The soldier twisted and slammed the creature against the wall, roaring as fangs like knives punctured his shoulder before the wolf collapsed to the floor. That shout again. The light in those flashing green eyes. Before Ashkelon, a hero spat to the side, lifted his broken sword at the ready, and faced death with flint in his soul. To Ashkelon, trapped in this world of pitiful gray mediocrity, he shone like a newborn star. Beneath the sorcerer's mask of shadow, an involuntary smile tugged at his lips, and swords of ice sprouted from his fists. The novelty of the smile only broadened it further as he stalked forward into the pack, sweeping his blades out to his sides like scythes. It truly was a day of firsts. He had never saved a hero before. When the storm of darkness erupted into the room, Gideon sighed. It was one more bad thing to add to the bad day. They had him backed into a corner, the hounds of the Crow Father prowling toward him, and more coming. Armand Halcyon's sword now extended only 8 inches beyond the hilt, the rest still sticking out of the mouth of some twisted thing 2 floors down. He had refused to run when the rest did. He had seen the remains of the woman the Crow Father's demons had fed upon. I'm not leaving without justice. Derision had curled the lips of his companions as they fled. Even in their cowardice, they found breath to mock the pretend night. Now he stood on the last floor before the Crow Father's sanctum, more by virtue of his stubbornness than anything. His size also helped. Gideon probably weighed 2 or 3 stone more than the next man, all of it hardened first by farm work, then soldiering. It seemed, though, his luck had run out. He did not think his size was going to do anything to the sorcerer emerging from his conjured darkness, eyes glittering like sapphires above a black half mask. Now was as good a time for a quick prayer as ever. Lord, please receive my spirit. Swords of ice extended from the Shadow Man's fists, angling out to his sides. And I hope you have good hands, because I think I'm coming home fast. The venomous thorns on the pain-giver's lash hissed past Gideon's ear, and he snapped back into the moment. He jerked his head to the side, reflexively, dodging the poisoned weapon and dropping his shield down to catch a hell wolf as it tried to crush his knee in its maw. His shoulder ignited with pain from the bite there, but he gritted his teeth and forced the pain away. The beast clawed at the boss on his shield, snarling as its demonic claws shredded the wood away. Shouting, Gideon stomped his armored boot into its jaw, snapping yellowed fangs out of its mouth. The demon yelped and fell backwards, scratching at its face and squealing. Gideon took a breath and set himself as 10 hell wolves with gleaming yellow eyes stalked toward him. Behind them, the sorcerer stalked forward, raising his icy blades in salute. This would probably not take very long, but by the Almighty, Gideon would not enter Heaven's gates without a final fight. He smashed his shattered sword against the boss of his shield and bellowed, "Who's first, then?" He was not expecting an answer, which is why he jerked when something whispered into his mind. Save the rhetoric. It shall be over swiftly. Gideon jerked at the voice in his head. Memory layered across his vision, and he saw the dark sorcerer with new eyes. Oh no, not you. Not here. The skin around the man's eyes crinkled with a hidden smile, and the voice answered, "Believe me, I am as amused as you that I am here to help." In a shadowed blur, the sorcerer rammed his left-hand blade into the unsuspecting handler's neck and twisted, snapping the blade off. As the corpse fell to its knees, the killer who had called himself Ashkelon clenched his fist and wrenched it backward. Every hell wolf tore off of its feet with a surprised howl, away from Gideon and directly toward the black mage. Ashkelon's remaining blade of ice slashed twice, and he cut apart 2 of the creatures in midair, carving through the tainted meat without resistance. Acid blood showered around him, yet not a drop touched the Dark Lord as the bisected wolves flopped to the floor. The survivors crashed into the far wall, their claws scraping at the stone as the hell wolves sought purchase. Ashkelon dipped his head slightly toward Gideon. "Greetings." His eyes widened in both recognition and mild surprise, and he cocked his head to the side. Again, it seems. Ashkelon's back faced the wolves rising from where he had thrown them. The pack snarled and leapt forward. Ashkelon swept to the side, speared a wolf in midair, and slammed it into the ground, shattering his second blade into fragments of skittering ice as he pounded the demon into the floor. Claws and fangs snapped where he stood. "You are taller than I last saw you." Gideon watched as Ashkelon lunged and gripped a wolf by the skull and spine, lifting the hapless creature above his head. For half a second, lightning coursed through the creature, lighting it from the inside, and thunder cracked in the room as the smell of ozone and burnt hair flooded Gideon's nose. Ashkelon rammed the corpse into the mouth of its packmate and kicked both animals back. He twisted his wrist as both creatures hit the ground, and the body of the burned hell wolf contorted of its own volition, snaking around the body of the living wolf and squeezing like a python. Bones snapped in both demons. The remainder of the pack backed away, ears flat and whimpers just beginning. A bit late for that, I think. The killer snapped his fingers, and each surviving wolf dropped from sight as their own shadows swallowed them whole. The sorcerer sighed and rubbed at his jaw, the black mask dissipating into smoke at his touch and revealing the lines of his face. He turned back to Gideon and held up a finger. "I believe I know the answer, but I must ask to be certain. Do you remember me?" Gideon lashed out with his shield, throwing it forward in an arc to drive the iron rim into the side of the sorcerer's head. A groggy sorcerer could not focus to cast. His shield met nothing but air. Ashkelon sidestepped the blow easily, his almost smile never leaving his face. Gideon stumbled a bit, but recovered enough to send the shield back along its course with a roar, again trying to bash the sorcerer in the head. Ashkelon thrust his palm forward and stiff-armed the shield, halting the blow before it could gather any strength. With a deft move, he kicked out Gideon's leg and sent the soldier crashing to the floor. I see that you do. Gideon twisted around on the stones and stabbed upward into Ashkelon's groin with the shard of the sword in his hand. Ashkelon caught the blade in his palm, the iron refusing to penetrate his gauntlet, and twisted the blade out of the young man's hand. Enough, he said. Rolling to his feet, Gideon again swung his shield toward Ashkelon's head, leading with the boss. The sorcerer blocked it with his forearm and sighed audibly. The same attack again. You require instruction more than I believed. And he destroyed Gideon's shield. Ashkelon's hand stiffened into a claw, and he raked down the surface of the shield. Darkness flared from his fingertips as it dragged furrows through the wood, and the shield exploded into shrapnel. Gideon staggered back a step, his eyes wide, but judging from the balling of his fists, undeterred. Ashkelon raised an eyebrow. I suppose I should find this stubbornness a virtue, but for now it wastes our time. Calm yourself. The boy attacked anyway. This time, Ashkelon used no sorcery. He slapped the first fist away and struck him in the stomach with his palm. His elbow swung up to crack under the man's jaw, then swung back with a powerful backhand to slam him spinning into the wall. Gideon sagged to the floor, dazed from the precise blows. Ashkelon stood over the downed man, bemused but patient. Have you finished yet? I would rather not kill you, as I did your companions. Bleeding from nose and mouth, Gideon glared up at him. If you really killed my friends, then you are going to want to kill me too. Ashkelon smiled again. Do not threaten me, apprentice. Bravado accomplishes nothing, and wastes time when action will do so much more. Besides, the cowards who left you to die are not what I understand to be friends. Gideon squinted at him. Apprentice, what are you talking about? Ashkelon considered the soldier for a moment, thinking how best to phrase his thoughts. Squatting down next to him, Ashkelon said, I have a proposition for you. You will bind yourself utterly to my service for the duration of your apprenticeship, and in return, I will give you what you desire most. Gideon lifted himself to a seated position, his armor scraping as he scooted away from the sorcerer. And what do you think I desire most? Ashkelon gestured around him at the fallen hellhounds, the twisted bodies of cultists. You wish to be a hero. Gideon opened his mouth, but Ashkelon cut him off. Spare me the requisite protests of false humility. I know you better than you know yourself. I imagine you are here to remove the master of this tower, likely in an attempt to spare some commoners his predations upon them. The sorcerer answered slowly. Yes, something like that. Ashkelon's throne turned hard. You did not even make it to his sham of a throne room. But for my intervention, you would have gnawed in a demon's doghouse. You would have died in a demon's doghouse, remembered only by the mutants gnawing on your bones. Accept my tutelage, and I can prevent such a fate. He had Gideon's attention, albeit against his will. How? The boy asked. Ashkelon seated himself upon the ground, the shadows pooling around him. I am a master of death. I have been inculcated in the doctrines of the everlasting dark, which includes more than a few studies of the light. More relevant to you, I have faced thousands of heroes and sinners of every persuasion, whether mage, knight, scholar, assassin, or warlock, and slain them all. Train under me, and I will teach you everything I have learned over generations of conflict against the finest champions heaven and hell have to offer. Ashkelon drew Gideon's broken sword from the ground and fingered the shattered metal. A solid weapon, well made, lacking any magical properties. Absently, Ashkelon summoned the missing fragments into his other hand and began to fit them together. I would like to train you to be a killer beyond compare. I will take the raw material that you are and forge you into a weapon that both the dark and the abyss will learn to fear. Gideon watched with wide eyes as Ashkelon fused the weapon back together. Ashkelon's gauntlets pressed against the metal shards, and wisps of shadow escaped from the cracks before they sealed together, leaving no evidence the blade had ever been broken. Ashkelon offered the weapon back to Gideon. At the risk of sounding arrogant, my craftsmanship is second to none. Will you accept my offer? Hesitantly, Gideon reached out. His hand wrapped around the hilt, but his eyes never left Ashkelon's. At last, he glanced away, toward the stairway, and said, I can't yet. The Crow Father still has to... Ashkelon clenched a fist and intoned, Jacques. Above him, Gideon heard someone start to scream. The voice spiraled higher and higher, increasing in desperation until it shrieked like a tea kettle. A second later, a titanic explosion rocked the tower, knocking dust and decorations from the stone walls. Gideon gripped the stones as the tower's skeleton groaned around him from the fearsome blast. When the noise faded, Ashkelon repeated, Will you accept my offer? Judging from the shutters of the tower, Gideon thought it a safe bet that everything above this floor was dead. He glanced at the sorcerer sitting beside him. Something vicious lurked in the man's striking eyes, a caged madness flickering like a flame. Gideon had the distinct feeling that the man saw him more as components than a human being. And yet, demons, sorcerers, and soldiers lay strewn in his wake. Gideon's shoulder burned like fire from the bite he had taken, and his muscles ached from the battle through the tower. Ashkelon did not appear to have exerted himself at all. Oh Lord, I am actually seriously considering his offer. I do want to be a hero. What do I do? His own words from 5 years ago, directed in spite at the hellish enemy who had brutalized his mother, rose within in his memory. I asked for this. He pressed his lips together. He could hear his mother now, hands on her hips, saying, Either pray specifically or be thankful for the answer you get. Taking a deep breath, Gideon offered his hand to the sorcerer. If you can make me a better fighter, then I accept, Master. Ashkelon smiled, this time without humor. Your first lesson, then. 8 inches of ice burst through Gideon's ribs and tore his lungs in half before lancing into his heart. His breath withered in his chest as cold spread through his torso, clawing toward his shocked eyes, where black clouds gathered. Gideon did not feel his body slump against the floor, nor his blood draining from the awful rent in his chest. Rather, he felt his self begin to fall, swirling around a great well of darkness like a leaf in a drain. Ashkelon's voice remained conversational, though it seemed to come from a great distance. This is called death. Gideon could not speak, though he tried. His murderer leaned over him, his smile the only thing he could see through the shadows taking over his vision. You should get used to it. And the darkness took him. Okay, I think that's it for now. My throat is cutting out because I write nothing but demons and raspers and everything. And someday I'm going to write a happy book. And Gideon will have a good day in the happy book. It's not this book. So hope you guys enjoyed. Again, I'm still workshopping Ashkelon's voice. I'm not super happy with it yet. I have like a mixture of Swain from League of Legends. I'm going for Hugo Weaving from The Matrix and Lord of the Rings. I'm not good at it because I'm not a voice actor. But I'm working on it. So I'll keep workshopping it, keep practicing, and you guys maybe will get to suffer through it. So hope you guys have a good day. Hey, Katie, you showed up. Nice to see you. Yeah, Gideon had a bad time. So we'll do this again some other time. I hope my kids weren't too loud in the background. I don't think I heard them too much. So you guys have a good rest of your day, and we'll see if we can't get another couple chapters up some other time. All right, see you.